between what's a prophecy and what's not. Then, if you can do that, something like that, right? You can interpret anything as a prophecy.
Yeah. So besides the very specific ones that Jesus fulfilled, what do you think about his resurrection and why his disciples wrote those accounts? Do you think they're crazy or they're lying or?
No, I think these are probably stories that were being passed around. I mean, the Gospels were written decades after the event. You have the synoptic problem too. So you have Matthew and Luke copying off of Mark. So that's Matthew, Mark, and
This
Luke.
is a common occurrence for historical reportage. Any historian from that time period is going to use source documents to compare as notes and write their historical accounts with. This is a common practice. This is not something that you can criticize the synoptics for. This is actually how good history was done.
Yeah, they were using sources, but they're not just using sources and making notes. They're copying word for word. 95% of Mark appears in Matthew, and we see like word for word copying.
Yeah, it was his source document, and he expounded upon many of the passages in Mark, as did Luke for Matthew. You can see how they made minor adjustments in the text to expand on certain stories. This is not bad history. This is good history. This is how historians work with each other to make sure that we are reporting what actually occurred. This is the intention of these documents is to report the events and the teachings with truth. And then you have the early church fathers quoting about their meticulous work in preserving the message of Jesus, the truth of Jesus's life. When they refer to the authors of the Gospels.
Who refers to authors of the Gospels? And
first, we have Papias, which was quoted in Eusebius in the 5th century, but was written in the 1st century. This quotation it reads as the following. This is from Papias, quoted in Eusebius again. "For I did not like the multitude take pleasure in those who spoke much, but in those who taught the truth. For in those who related strange commandments, but in those who rehearsed the commandments given by the Lord to faith, and proceeding from truth itself. If then anyone who had attended on the elders came, I asked minutely after their sayings, what Andrew or Peter said, or what was said by Philip, or by Thomas, or by James, or by John, or by Matthew, or by any of the Lord's disciples, which things Aristion and the presbyter John, the disciples of the Lord, say, for I imagined that what was to be got from the books was not so profitable to me as what came from the living, abiding voice." You also have a letter to Polycrates of Ephesus.
Wait, let's talk about the Papias one first. Let's talk about that one first. It's Eusebius quoting him, right?
Yeah.
He's basically saying the oral tradition was preserved, right? He's saying the oral tradition
of the disciples, right? The eyewitness community.
Right. Eusebius actually calls him an idiot. He says Papias was an unintelligent man. And one of the reasons people think he said this is because Eusebius seemed to be against believing like oral tradition could be perfectly preserved. He thinks that you should write things down. And Papias, if you look at what he's talking about when he mentions the Gospels, he only mentions Matthew and Mark, right, by name. But when he mentions them, he says Matthew is an oracle written in the Hebrew language. So I don't think he's talking about our Matthew, because our Matthew was not written in Hebrew first. It was Greek. And when he talks about Mark, he says Mark is an unordered collection of Jesus' sayings and doings.
No, Peter's. Papias talks about him being a interpreter of Peter's sayings.
Yeah. But when he's talking about the Gospel of Mark, according to Peter, which is another interesting question. Why is it not called the Gospel according to Peter? But anyway,
this is actually a piece of evidence that shows that they are reliably authored. If they were trying to just make it believable, they wouldn't have included someone who was not a disciple of Jesus. They included two people who were not disciples of Jesus. Why would they entitle them to people who were not known by the audience already? Why would they entitle them to two random Gentiles? This is actually evidence for the authorship being what it was and being trustworthy. They had no reason
Well,
to give them those titles unless they were actually the ones who wrote them.
so there's two reasons. One, it might be the case that Mark was known at the time, okay, because if he was a companion of Peter. And two is, at the time, we did already have, so if they're trying to portray Peter's message, and they're trying
I thought
to
you were
counter.
trying to argue that they didn't actually write it, that Mark didn't actually write it, though.
Yeah, I know.
You think Mark actually wrote it?
I'm trying to explain why they would give the name Mark to it and not Peter. So the reason probably is because at that time we had the preachings of Peter, we had the apocalypse of Peter, and I'm pretty sure we already had the gospel of Peter.
No, that was far later. The Apocalypse of Peter. That was like 3rd or 4th century, I believe.
Well,
That was in
we already had I know I'm 100% sure we already had a text with Peter's name on it at the time. Okay, and I know this because
You mean this 1st and 2nd Peter, which are in the New Testament canon?
no, like a Gnostic text, like a gospel.
No, those were all written in later centuries, brother.
No. By the time these names are being attributed, there were already other works by other.
Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter is a 2nd century work.
Yeah.
2nd century, not 1st century.
Okay. And when do we start seeing the name Mark attributed to the Gospels? It's not until the 2nd century. So when they're trying to write,
they're writing about the Mark who traveled with Peter, though. They're writing about the interpreter of Peter who lived in the 1st century. This is the
No, I don't think they were. But
no, yeah, it's talked about. They talk about how Ignatius was a disciple of John, I think.
yeah, I mean, look, Ignatius doesn't tell us this himself. We find this through Irenaeus. Okay, let me finish my first point.
There's no reason to believe that they're just making all this crap up. Do you realize how much you have to say that they're just pulling out of their asses in order to sweep away all this evidence? All this evidence is good history. It's good, reasonable history to conclude that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels. There's a ton of quotations I have not even gotten to when it comes to why people believe that those are the authentic authors. But
look,
if you're so unwilling to believe this historical evidence, you just have to conclude that they're just making all of these texts, all these quotes are just pulling out of their asses. This is getting ridiculous, brother.
Okay,
you understand? Do you see that?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think Irenaeus had good reason. Look, when Irenaeus is writing at the end of the 2nd century
to get unalived, so he can get himself unalived.
No, just listen for 1 second. When Irenaeus is writing at the end of the 2nd century, we're at a time where there's all these different gospels going around, all these different traditions, right? They want to establish authority. That's what they want to do. So they want
to establish an authority that is not sexist, that preaches against racism, that everyone was a racist at that time, that preaches against the abuse of children, that preaches high ethics, genius ethics, actually, that are almost impossible to follow. In fact, I would argue they are impossible to follow in the flesh. They're making all this crap up for power and authority, and then they get killed for it. They go to their graves to get power and authority. They go to their graves.
Look.
Lying.
This happens all the time. Do you think Marcion's lying when he said Luke took his gospel and changed it? The gospel of Luke was his, just changed. Do you think Marcion?
You'll have to give me the quote, brother.
Marcion is saying that the gospel of Luke, the writer of it, took his and just changed everything. Right? That's what
I don't know that quote.
I don't think he's lying. I think he's trying to establish the authority of his gospel, and we see.
Like I said, you're gonna have to pull up the quote.
You want to pull up the quote?
Yeah, I can't just take your word on something as you said that in very strong verbiage. I don't think that is.
Okay. Now, if I pull up the quote and show you
correctly
that Marcion said that, are you going to admit that Christians at the time did lie to preserve their tradition and to establish authority?
No, for 2,000 years, people have believed the testimony of the disciples because of its trustworthiness in rings of truth. as well as the testament of the early church that talked often about how they intended and worked hard to preserve the authentic teachings on the gospel.
Okay, so do you think all 40 Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel according to Peter, all these sorts of texts, do you think these are all lies? The names attributed to them?
They clearly teach a contrary philosophy, which is a Gnostic philosophy. It's the idea that all things in spirit are good, all things in flesh are evil. So it departs from the traditional teachings of the Bible, which teaches that God made the flesh and the spirit. God made everything, and the flesh was created good. So this Gnostic philosophy is talked about. It's reflected in those Gospels, and it was taken down, debunked by the early church, who knew and had the texts from the eyewitnesses, the testimony from the eyewitnesses. Also, they were all written between the 2nd and even like the 17th century. There's some that pop up, like the Gospel of Barnabas. So these are clearly not first century documents that are source evidence for the life of Jesus. It's been debunked for 2,000 years.
So we agree that people are lying about authorship in the 2nd century.
Yes.
Okay, so great. So why is it so hard to believe that someone like Irenaeus would lie about some like apostolic succession, or that?
Like I said, brother, we have a lot of historical evidence that the early church had this tradition passed down from the disciples of the people who walked and talked with Jesus themselves. This is a direct line to the eyewitnesses, and this was their standard for proclaiming that this is a gospel and this is a true story from the eyewitness community. They were extremely intent on sharing the eyewitnesses' testimony and making sure that we aren't getting any forgeries mixed in the 2nd century. But you are at the point, brother, where you don't want to accept the testimony from the most authentic followers of Christ and that direct line from the eyewitness community. You want to believe that every single thing they're writing about these events and about these documents is just lies that they're pulling out their butts. But it's ridiculous for you to make that scenario up in your head. You just want to deny it because of the evidence is there. The evidence is there. It's your choice whether you follow the evidence or not. But I'm telling you, bro, the evidence points to these documents being authentic, and it's talked about over and over and over again by tons of different early church fathers, as well as different events in the Bibles being talked about outside of the realm of believers. So it's like, man, you have to reach a point where you can go with where the evidence points you.
Okay, like I think the evidence...
Just because other forgeries were made in the 2nd century doesn't mean you have to wipe off every single person off the map as being a liar just because other forgeries were made.
You just asked me why would they lie, and I was like, you already believe people lied about those types of things in the 2nd century. That's all I'm trying to establish. And that would be a perfect lie if you're trying to say something to get authority.
A perfect lie that gets you killed? Perfect lie that gets you executed in the Roman Colosseum?
What?
It's not a perfect lie. That's a lie that got you killed.
I don't know how you're not like following. You think everyone who...
They were lying and they died for their faith. A lot of these guys are martyrs, bro. A lot of these guys are martyrs. They went to their graves based on this lie that they just pulled out of their butts. They pulled it out of their butts and they said, well, let's go to our executions based off this lie. I know that we're gonna die, but maybe we'll have a little power for a little bit and influence. That's not psychologically. That's not how it works.
You think the disciples were martyred?
Yes, the early church talks about the disciples being martyred over and over and over again. Even Jesus talked about the martyrship of the disciple Peter.
Yeah, what's the evidence for that? Okay, Peter, fine. I can grant Peter.
In the gospel.
The Gospels don't tell us anything about the martyrs.
Do you know about the Roman Emperor Nero?
Yes, that's not a martyrdom.
There's tons of martyrdoms going on during Nero. He killed Paul. I think he killed Peter, too.
That makes it not a martyrdom, though. He was killing them because he blamed them for a fire, right? That's not to say they had a chance to recant. He wasn't like, oh, you're a Christian, I'm going to kill you unless you recant. No, he used them as a scapegoat for the fire. That's all.
There are other emperors that persecuted Christians beside Nero, though, bro.
Okay, but let's look at like Matthew, for example.
They could have said Hail Caesar and been saved. but they held to their Christian faith and their belief that Jesus had risen from the grave. They held to that.
Look, we have all of
Were
these.
they lying? Were they
all
lying?
Of these martyrdoms. I don't think that happened. We don't know what happened to the other disciples.
Okay.
After Jesus died. These are all like super late accounts, flooded with mythology, right? Like Peter getting beheaded. Do you know where that comes from?
Paul got beheaded.
Sorry, yeah. Paul getting beheaded. You know where that comes from?
I forget at the moment.
Yeah, it comes from...
But I know historians take it as a serious account.
It comes from a later Gnostic text, and it says that Paul was beheaded and that milk came out of his head. That's where it came from. Our earliest account, Clement, First Clement, which talks about the martyrdom of Paul, doesn't mention him being beheaded. But I would grant you, Paul. Fine. Paul's a martyrdom account. Okay, he's not even a disciple, though. Peter being crucified upside down. You probably heard that before, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that comes from I think it's the Apocalypse of Peter or the Gospel of Peter, one of those two, where Jesus comes back to be crucified for a second time, and Peter goes, "No, Lord, I'll go in your place."
It says there is a tradition supported by the early church historians like Eusebius that claims that Paul...
I was really just about to say that.
Eusebius is writing in like the 3rd century.
It's in the church history.
It's a tradition passed down from the earliest church, bro.
Yeah, they're later legends mythologized. Eusebius is like way too late for that.
Again, you can claim that everything that we're saying is just a thing that they're pulling out their butts, but that's what you want to believe.
Though. Like, why would you quote Eusebius, whose scholarship agrees that he's reliable when looking into the church history and the traditions? Like, you would pull him up and then say, yeah, but ignore him, though.
What do you mean? What did I pull him up for?
Well, because like we're talking about well, you didn't bring him up specifically, but we're sitting here talking about Peter and how it was mentioned by Eusebius, and you're saying, well, we can't take Eusebius's word for it because he was X amount of years after Christ. I guess.
Yeah, super late account.
Right. So why does scholarship accept Eusebius?
Well, it depends what he's writing about. I guarantee you scholarship would not accept his word on...
Can you prove that?
Okay, you're making the claim that they do, right? So show me that scholarship does accept Eusebius when he talks about martyrdom.
You originally made the claim that they don't. You made the original claim.
Oh my! I said I probably think they don't, but...
Right, so can you substantiate that?
Okay, I could try to look up sources right now. But you're saying they do. You're saying you literally made the claim that scholarship accepts you.
Amen. I don't mind providing that, but because you made the initial claim that we can't trust him, I would like to know why.
No,
So
I said he's writing super late, and those martyrdom accounts have been heavily mythologized. We see this all throughout the 2nd century.
Can you substantiate that claim then?
Yes. Okay. Look, we have the Gospel of Peter, like I told you about.
That's not
mythologizes Peter's.
Yeah, so like I understand what you're saying, right? You're saying like I can see where it was mentioned in this Gnostic text. I'm totally catching that. But what you're saying is you're essentially saying that Eusebius interpolated or edited or added to the text or added mythology into the text.
No.
So my question would be, how do you substantiate that claim?
I'm saying it's unreliable what he's saying because of how late it is and because of how mythologized it is. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Do you believe that Alexander existed? Alexander the Great?
I was just about to make that point.
Yeah, we have contemporary writings.
But not until after 400 years, though.
Yep, about 400 years after.
You're making a mistake here. The manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts come that late, but...
Interesting. So do you mean that there was a tradition that was believed before it was written in the manuscript?
What? What's your question?
Was there a tradition passed down for 400 years?
Yeah, so you're saying that it was put into a manuscript 400 years later?
It was written before that. No, it was written before that.
Oh, it was written before that.
Earliest. Yeah, we have contemporary writings from people that work directly under him. And I'm pretty sure we have writings from him, I'm pretty sure.
You know, we got even more for the New Testament and the Gospels. We got way
Yeah,
more.
that was kind of my point. It's not to say he didn't exist. It was just to say that the evidence that's there for Alexander the Great doesn't even begin to touch the evidence that we have for the New Testament claims of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
You can take the miracle claims out of that if you would like to, just for the sake of conversation.
Yeah, I believe Jesus existed. That's about the farthest you'll get from that. But we're talking about Eusebius. And his
Yeah,
account.
but you're talking about truth claims on how somebody passed away, not really supernatural claims. So these truth claims wouldn't be things that we could just agree to disagree for the sake of conversation, because these aren't supernatural claims, very naturalistic claims.
Yeah, but I don't know how you're not understanding my point here. We can see all throughout the 2nd century and even 3rd century, all these different accounts of martyrdoms and what happened to the disciples after. Okay, and Eusebius is writing super late, after all this stuff is coming out, and there's no clear chain of what's going on or where people are getting this information from. How can we say Eusebius is accurately portraying what's going on here? That's the point.
I got you. I can understand what you're saying. I'm understanding you. Can I steelman it back to make sure I'm understanding you correctly?
Yeah, sure.
So Eusebius doesn't arrive until 200 plus years AD, after the resurrection and the assumption and everything has already happened. Therefore, how can we trust his claims as if they were eyewitness testimony, even if it's passed through tradition, right?
No, that's not really a steel man.
Okay, can you correct me then?
That's one point. Yeah, he's writing about 200 or something years after.
Okay,
But
so
we see multiple different accounts of what's going on with the disciples after Jesus resurrected and stuff, right?
that's fine. So
there's a lot of different contradictory stories surrounding these events.
It felt like at first you were saying we couldn't trust Eusebius because of his timing after the events had to have happened. Because of where Eusebius falls on the timeline, he wasn't an actual witness to these things. I feel like that's kind of maybe what you're stepping in. And if it's going over my head, you can break it down for me further.
I don't know how. I think I've explained it well enough. I don't think I can explain it any differently.
Noah, do you feel that I've steelmanned it correctly in a sense that he's claiming that Eusebius is 200 years after the fact? Therefore, why would we take these contradictory claims from things that came before Eusebius? I mean, would you agree that I'm steelmanning this correctly, or am I not?
No, I don't think so. Actually, I think Mob, you're trying to show that the events surrounding the disciples' deaths cannot be trusted because there are multiple different variations of what happened to them in certain Gnostic texts that come afterwards. So why would Eusebius choose the right form of death if there's multiple different accounts of what happened to the disciples that were made up after the fact? What I want from you, though, Mob, what I want from you is, despite the disciples and the obscurity of their deaths, or what you think is not trustworthy testament of how they were unalived, even by the earliest church in the 1st and 2nd centuries, when they talk about the deaths of the disciples, it's tossing that all aside. What do you think happened that inspired these people to write these very specific accounts of the resurrection? What were they trying to do? Were they trying to make people treat each other better with equality? Were they just making up these stories about Jesus? Do you think Jesus was a sorcerer, as the Pharisaical tradition calls him? What happened? What do you think happened back then? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think maybe people had some sort of experience or something like that, and they told their friends and stuff, and then it kind of spread that way. And then stories
and meticulously well done gospel narratives, Greco-Roman style biographies, that Luke is now considered one of the best, if not the best, historian of ancient days of antiquity, because of just how well done his gospel is written. These people, clearly didn't hallucinate what they were claiming. They weren't crazy.
He used Josephus as a source. That's why he's historically reliable.
So Luke is historically reliable.
No, there's historically reliable things in it, but he gets things
Oh,
wrong.
yeah.
But like
He gets things wrong?
yeah,
Like what?
like the census of Quirinius.
No, that's been debunked, buddy. I remember that one. Census of...
But
You're talking about the census that Mary and Joseph went to?
yes,
Yeah, that's... I've heard that
But
one before.
why you
Inspiring
look it up?
Philosophy has a video on that.
I want to ask Proud Bible Thumper a question. Do you believe the response to the Evangelium, right? Do you believe that when that says Papias wrote the Gospel of John in the mid-2nd century? Do you believe
I don't know what
that?
you're talking about. Low-key, sorry.
The response to Marcion's Gospel. It's in there.
I
It
don't
says
even know who
Papias.
Marcion is. Is that a
Marcion,
Gnostic?
yeah, he's a Docetist. Or, yeah, he doesn't believe Jesus was like an actual like flesh human walking around on earth.
Yeah, no, I've read like a couple of the Gnostics. I've read the Gospel of Judas, the one of the Apocrypha of John. I've also read Second Enoch. I've read I wouldn't even consider Enoch Gnostic, but yeah, like I've read a couple of them, but I haven't read that one, so I can't speak on that one.
Okay. Do you believe who was it?
I think it was.
Actually, hold on. Let me pull it up before I say the wrong name.
Yeah, Inspiring Philosophy has a 10-minute video just explaining all the evidence that Luke actually got the date of the census correct.
Yeah, I know. People try to counter. They try to say certain things about it.
Yeah, there's plenty of sources for his information in that as well, including Sir William Ramsay, the atheist who set out to disprove the Bible and the New Testament through archaeology and ended up believing, because of the substantial amount of evidence for the New Testament being historical and reliable.
Who? Lee Strobel?
No, Sir William Mitchell Ramsay, 19th century archaeologist.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's the best evidence then for the resurrection?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the historical source documents for the life of Jesus. They recount the resurrection very specifically and talk about it being a 40-day period that they saw him. They also talk about his ascension to heaven specifically, and then events of other appearances
Can you show me?
to people after even that. What's up?
Can you show me another text from that time period where people are writing in third person? Okay, they're writing in third person and they don't tell us who they are.
Yeah, there's plenty of texts that are biographical that don't include internal authorship.
No, and they're written in third person. They're written as a third person account.
Is Luke written in third? Well, Luke, have you read the beginning of Luke's gospel? Luke
Yeah,
chapter
where it
1?
says he's accounting. He's trying to write down things that he heard from people.
Yeah, clearly he's writing to an audience that knows who he is, and there would presumably be a authorship or a title, a signature on the outside of that scroll that he sent, or in the title of a codex, whatever.
Yeah, but Luke's not an eyewitness anyway. Right?
No, he interviewed the eyewitnesses, as he clearly recounts in Luke chapter 1.
Yeah, okay. See, but you think Matthew and Mark, or you think Matthew and John, are eyewitness accounts, right?
Clearly.
Okay, then show me another text that is purporting to be an eyewitness account, or is supposed to be an eyewitness account that writes in third person and doesn't tell us who they are.
I don't understand how is that a problem? Just because of the style of the text?
Because those accounts at that time are usually not eyewitness accounts. That's the point. Our earliest.
Well, these were, so chill. It doesn't. The way that they're written isn't an issue. The authors were clearly known from the very beginning. The authors were known to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you read the early church fathers.
Why doesn't Justin Martyr call them that then? Why does he call them the
the writings of the apostles? Why doesn't he name them?
Because his audience would know who the apostles are already.
Oh,
After their
then why does-
departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, did also hand down to us in writing what had been preached by Peter. That's Irenaeus against heresies.
Yeah,
While that
and Irenaeus is
gospel
getting
which
that from
Mark
Papias.
published, while that gospel which Mark published may be affirmed to be Peter's, whose interpreter Mark was. That's Tertullian against Marcion. Mark recorded who was called whatever this name is because he had fingers that were too small for the height of the rest of his body. He himself was the interpreter of Peter. After the death of Peter himself, the same man wrote this gospel in the parts of Italy. That's the anti-Marcionite prologue.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
The
earlier.
follower of Peter, while Peter was publicly preaching the gospel at Rome before some of Caesar's knights and producing many testimonies about Christ, being begged by them that they should be able to record what was said, wrote the gospel, which is called the Gospel of Mark, from the things said by Peter. Clement of Alexandria. The second gospel was that according to Mark. He wrote it according to Peter's instructions. That's Origen, Ecclesiastical History. The presbyter said this. Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately whatsoever he remembered. It was not, however, in exact order that he related these sayings or deeds of Christ, for he neither heard the Lord nor accompanied him, but afterwards, as I said, he accompanied Peter, who accommodated his instructions to the necessities of his hearers, but with no intention of giving a regular narrative of the Lord's saying. Wherefore, Mark made no mistake in thus writing some things he remembered as he remembered them. For one thing, he took special care not to omit anything that he heard, and not to put anything fictitious into the statements. That's Papias quoted in Eusebius. I can go on. This is just for the Mark Gospel of Mark.
This all stems from Papias. Papias
No,
is the original.
I just quoted who these people were. Do you see here the quotes before the Papias quote? There's 3 quotes before the Papias quote.
People that lived before Papias saying Mark wrote Mark. That's what you're telling me you have.
Tertullian,
No, he
the
wasn't.
anti-Marcionite prologue,
That was not
Clement of Alexandria, 1st century early church father, and then Origen. So
You're
this is
talking-
not just Papias.
No, none of those writings came before Papias's. Hold on, there's a guy who's like begging to come up here. Cyprian Clude.
Papias? Which Papias? Like, are y'all talking about, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but like I say like papayas.
Yeah, I'm probably
I
pronouncing
know.
it wrong.
Is it like, is that
probably
what we're
thinking-
talking about though?
You're probably thinking of papyrus, which is
Yeah.
like the paper that they used to write
No,
on.
I'm not thinking of papyrus.
it's,
I'm thinking of Papius.
Yeah,
Papias of Hierapolis. Papias of Hierapolis was a Greek apostolic father, bishop of Hierapolis, and author between 60 and 130 AD.
Can you let that guy up, by the way? Cyprian? Thank you. Yeah. So I'm telling you that the tradition stems from Papias, okay? That's where Irenaeus gets it from, okay? And I already told you, I don't think Papias is actually talking about our Mark. Because the way he describes it doesn't seem like our Mark. He's describing it as an unordered list of Jesus' sayings and doings.
The interpreter of Peter. Did Peter have 2 interpreters called Mark?
No.
Okay, he's talking about the same Peter, buddy.
No,
Or it's the same Mark. Mark.
He's talking about a writing that he believes was written by the interpreter of Peter, right? But when you actually look at what he thinks
He
about
doesn't
the
say
writing,
that he believes. It's clearly implied that it's true in the text. He's not writing about this as something he believes, though. This is something he authentically believes is true based on the traditions of the early church, which was meticulous about preserving the words of the Lord.
okay, so he
They
does
were
believe.
preserving it.
Yes. So may I comment about Papias in particular? Because I think his quote, you can verify it is false. So I will not even comment that the Gospel of Matthew, which we have, is not written in Hebrew, or how he names it. But the issue which I'm having is that if we are in the Papias quoting, he says that Matthew wrote correctly the events. And if you would agree, the unaliving, for example, of Judas Iscariot, or how you name it, Judas the kisser of Jesus, is specific and is very different from the Papias recalling. So if Papias quotes correct tradition and he had a Matthew, his Matthew, whatever Matthew he taught, has a different tradition of, you can look.
Papias says Judas swelled up and couldn't fit through the street.
Yes. So that it's so different.
This is why Eusebius
from every gospel.
Because, yeah.
Yes, but what I want to say that whatever gospel you think he had, it is a different gospel than what we talk as correctly transmitted through tradition. The other part which I personally disagree when you say the tradition is copied correctly, we know, if you look, I personally love Mark Goodacre, he's a Christian scholar. He has a very big book, Case Against You, but I don't want to say it's a good book or not. But what his job is to compare the synoptic problem, so basically compare texts. And you can see when Christians quote and misquote and modify between the Gospels. And this thing is known and done in seminaries for 150 years. And this is done to Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. Again, this is not an atheist point I want to make. So
I just want to make sure I'm understanding, just to make sure I'm understanding, and then I'll mute back up. Are you talking about can you repeat what you said? I actually don't even want to misrepresent that. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so I said two arguments. The first one is that
the second one.
Yes, so for at least 150 years in seminaries, this is discovered in the German Protestant schools, you'll learn what is named Markan primary. The first century state-of-the-art understanding of the synoptic problem. You'll understand that the Gospels, they quote each other, so they copy the traditions, but they also modify it. So just saying they don't modify each other, we have proof in the Gospels.
So
I don't think that's a problem.
That's why I wanted to make sure that I was understanding that. So you're claiming that the Gospels have been that they were referencing each other's Gospels.
Yeah, and they were expanding upon them. They were expanding upon them. There's several instances where they add detail to the stories. They're expanding the narrative. They're telling the truth, though. Why do you think they're lying?
Well, yeah, and reporters do that today. Like if you have 3 reporters and they're all gathered together from the same news station or from different news stations and they're trying to get a voice clip, they might say, hey, can you play that back so I can make sure I got it all? I mean, it's very normal.
Yeah.
But your analogy fails, and I can say to you where. And have you heard about Mike Licona? He's an apologist. Mike Licona, he's from Biola University. I won't say you can check this clip. Yes, he's scholar, but I won't say he's as much apologist as you can get. And he says, this is the problem with the Gospels today. Imagine you go to a Spanish restaurant, and by luck, all us 3, the guests, we know Spanish. We speak English, but we know Spanish. And we hear 2 people fighting, and they throw words, glass bottles, and so on. And we get word to word in English, the same wording. And the interesting part is that Spanish doesn't translate into English in one way. And these agreements are sometimes paragraphs, sometimes you have editorial notes, like so the reader may know. Sometimes you'll see that the author just does one correction, but all the paragraphs remain the same. Like Mark, it is very known making one mistake, because we talk about mistakes. Mark says that the king Herod, the Antipas, not the Herod the Great, does blah, 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 which goes to the John the Baptist losing the head. So this passage is parallel. It's both in Matthew and Luke. It is again word to word. But when it goes to king, the Matthew corrects and puts it tetrarch, because this was the correct title. We can go later why. And Luke goes in the same way, but he copies this way from Matthew, but later forgets to make the correction at the end of the passage. But all the rest it copies. So this is copying and correction. And there are many corrections that Matthew makes on the Mark's text.
This is
The
not
most
a
known
problem again.
one-
This is not an issue at all. Just because the eyewitnesses compared the Gospels and made sure that they were on point and they were expanding on some points does not mean that they were lying.
They were not. They were modifying to have a theological point. And one of the most known ones is
Not to have
maybe you know that
theological
Well,
To
look, can I
report
give,
the-
can I
It
give,
to
wasn't.
report
It was
the
a historical
teachings of
point.
Jesus, to
Cyprian.
report the historical account of Jesus, who they walked and talked with for 3 years.
here, let me give an example.
They would not. Okay, I'll give you a
There's
different
not
example to
differing
understand the
theology.
same point.
There's not differing theology. Jesus is God and he resurrects from the grave.
Yes, I can give you a different theology, but it's a different one, which is the most known example of correction between the Gospels in this sense. Do you know the demoniac scene with the we are the legion? So a demoniac has a legion of demons. They go into pigs. Pigs, they go to the lake and they swim there. Okay, you know that story briefly. And in Mark, he said, I think it's in Gerasa, if I remember right. I'll have to look at the Greek names. And Matthew noticed, hey, this place is 50 kilometers because you have to go around the Golan Heights away. So he moves it kind of 15, 20 kilometers away. And Luke says vaguely in this region, so could be on the side of the Lake of Galilee. And what kind of scholars agree that all of them got it wrong because they very likely the source which again Mark copies originally, he misheard the letter wrong. It's Gerasa versus Gergasa, something like that. It's one letter wrong. And all people which obviously were not witnesses, they would do corrections, but they do the wrong corrections. But there are a few more like that. But this is the most known one. The demoniac and the pigs walking 30 miles to get drowned because they are not on the side of Lake of Galilee.
I never heard that one. That's interesting.
Okay, but it is very known. I know it at least.
I can give you more examples too, like the Passover. Did Jesus die before or after? John has it before, and he
At
tells
this
us.
point, I was trying to track everything Cyprian said, but I feel like we skated through 50 points. And it's not because like I'm being disrespectful, but out of like absolute respect, it would be cool if we went one at a time because it's kind of hard for either one of us to sit here and track through 50 of those at a time.
Okay, the single argument I want to say that it is done, authors copy word by word in Greek, but hypothetically the talk was in Aramaic or whatever kind of popular Hebrew was used, because Hebrew was used in the temple, technically speaking. And that one, first of all, it will not translate one-to-one in Greek. And we know cases when translators would do it, but the Gospels writers would do one-to-one words in Greek, minus corrections, which were for their theological points. And this is quite impossible to achieve it without people corroborating, or how it's named. And there are many examples like that.
Yeah.
So here, and let me be very clear, there are cases when we know authors rewrote the passage and they use a different Greek. So probably you know this passage with Eli, Eli lama sabachthani. You know this passage. And later, you may not notice, but the gospel writers translate it and say, which it means, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me, right? But if you look into Greek, the wording of Matthew and Mark is so different. The old passage is similar in Greek, but the translation in Greek, because both they know Greek, is so different in Greek. In English, I don't know if you can see it, but you can check it with an interlinear Bible. So it's clear that authors could use their own wording. But they copied Greek to Greek, word to word. And this is also so hard because in Greek you can do one thing which I know as a native Romanian. You can use in any order the words in proposition. Like I can say I go home, or home I go, or I home go. And in all the cases in Romanian, it will mean the same thing. So the translation, you could do it in even if you have the same words, you could not keep
So
the
are
same
you
orders.
arguing for the translation?
No, for copying between gospel writers.
Maybe go one example at a time. Make it easier. Pick like your favorite one. You can do the first one about the lake being 50 kilometers or whatever.
Yeah, so this is the demoniac passage. I have to check with a laptop the passages, but is Gerasa, Gergasa, and Gadara, I think, if I remember right.
I'm sorry. I speak English, though. Can you give me the verse so I can go read it?
Yes, let me check on...
And regarding the Luke's demon possession location, there were different names for different places, like in a regional area. Luke was using a regional. He was speaking in the region of where it happened. He wasn't. This can be referred to the region that it happened in. This is. It's not a problem. He's not getting it wrong necessarily. He's just referring to the region in which it happened.
Yes.
Same general
So
idea.
Mark in Mark 5. So Mark in Mark 5 to verse from the verse 1. It says the region is Gergesin, and Gergesa, it was one of the towns of the Decapolis. There were 10 towns in the northern side of Israel, and so in Mark 5, it is Gergasa, more or less. It says in the region of Gergasa, but it is one of the regions. And some manuscripts, they supposedly corrected, they align it to be Gadara, like in Matthew. Let me find the Matthew
They
passage.
become more specific. So the point is that the event took place in a region near the Sea of Galilee. This is not a problem. Luke isn't getting it wrong necessarily. You can think he is. But
Right now, Mark is getting it wrong.
This is not a humongous like. Oh, this shows that Luke is not reliable at all historically. It does not.
Wait a minute. Okay, wait. So he's talking about how in Mark it says it happened next to this or in this region next to this thing,
Yes.
and then in another gospel it says elseways.
Yes, and it is
Region of
understood that it was done.
The whole time I was just trying to figure out what you were trying to get across. Okay.
Yes, so Gerasa
This isn't a problem. Why do you
is
think they're
around-
lying? Do you think
Yes,
they're lying?
No, they're correcting each other. Matthew sees that mistake that Mark made, and he's trying to correct it.
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
reporting accurate history there. That's not a problem. That actually supports the reliability of them trying to bring forth the truth about this.
Who's
man.
reporting accurate history, Matthew or Mark? They can't both be reporting accurate history.
Because they're kind
Yeah,
of
the region
10
near
or
the Sea
15
of
miles
Galilee.
away.
They were talking about a region in the Sea of Galilee.
Neither of them is by the sea. Neither of them is a region by the Sea of Galilee. One of them, as I said to you, I forgot in miles, I talk kilometers. But let's imagine one is kind of 25 miles and the other person makes it kind of 10 miles.
Clarify
From the
real
Sea of
quick. This
Galilee.
is Mark 5 and what else?
Verse 1. Matthew
Yeah, Mark
8
5,
from
1
verse...
and-
Yes, Matthew 8:28. It is Gadarene, in the region of Gadarene. Gadara is the town, the other town in Decapolis. You can look on the map of Decapolis to see there are different places.
Yeah. So is Gergesenes different from Gadarenes?
Yes, so Gadara and Gerasa, they were different Decapolis cities.
You know, it's
And-
interesting. There's a footnote in Mark 5, verse 1 that says some manuscripts say Gadarenes. Some say,
Yes, they harmonize it.
yeah,
Yes.
they're trying to fix it in the manuscripts.
Yeah, this isn't a
Yes.
problem. This does not show that they are lying.
I was actually just going to ask, why would that be an issue though?
Yeah.
Like
Not a
let's
problem.
just say for the sake of argument, right? Because we're not trying to be hard-headed and we want y'all to understand that. Let's say we concede this, right? Because we can see what you're saying. We're not just going to be blatantly just ridiculous about it, right? So let's just concede, yes, they went in and they tried to make sure it was more accurate. Why does that mean it's not reliable?
Because neither of them were by the Sea of Galilee, first of all. And
They both
the
are in
other
the
part
region
it
of
is
the
that
Sea of Galilee
look into
beyond
the
the Jordan
Greek.
River. Yes, they are. That's a lie. They're both in the region
that
of the
host
Sea
one
of
more
Galilee.
time?
one, especially Gerasin region or Gerasa, is over a mountain or Golan Heights. They are not quite. I mean, you could say they are by the Dead Sea, if you put like that, elastic geography. But to me, the issue is even better because the Greek, it is copied one from the other. So you'll notice that Matthew takes the text of Mark and it adjusts it where it's not convenient. So
the reason I'm not understanding though, and like if I could just paint an analogy, right, and maybe or an example, and you can explain to me using this example, right? So when I was like 10 years old, I was at a park in my hometown, and I was running at full speed, and I ran into a monkey bar and broke my nose right on the bridge of my nose, man. So if I say it happened in my hometown, but then let's say I can't remember where it happened and I say it happened in New York, does that mean that it didn't happen? Or does it mean that I was just, I was confused because I was young, right? So I'm not understanding why the locational aspect of it means that it's automatically just an untrue witness statement.
Right.
There are two issues with your statement. I agree that technically that act could happen. There could be some historical root of your act. The original claim which I started answering, I was saying the Gospels, they don't copy reliable traditions between each other. And this is one case where you could see because it modifies a fact. Even if you think Matthew corrected Mark, it didn't transmit it correctly, the tradition of early Christians. That was
changes
my
nothing
question,
about the
though,
mystical
is-
teachings, the life and the death and the resurrection of Christ. It changes nothing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is actually one of the things that even Bart Ehrman, an atheist scholar, argues for is if you take all of the textual variants, you take all of the contradictions, you take all those things out of the Bible. Confusion is if the problem is that this author says, oh, it happened by Salt Lake City, and the other person says, no, it happened in Brownfield, Texas. I mean, it doesn't really matter how far apart they're claiming it happened because they're still claiming the same thing. I don't think that it actually changes the truth of it. If I say I broke my nose at the park on 34th and Q, or I broke my nose at the park on Milwaukee, I still broke my nose. It was still a true story. I can't tell you to this day what park I broke my nose at, but that doesn't mean that it's all true.
They're close. Like Gadara and the place closer to the Sea of Galilee, it's in the same region, bro. It's not a problem.
So let's clarify.
It's in the same region.
Let's
near the
clarify.
Sea of Galilee. And another thing is, people might have used different names for different regions back in that time period too. So when he's using the broad near the city of Gergesa, he could just be referring to that general area, that region. So it's not actually a problem as much as you think it is. Just because there's differing in the exact location, he's talking about a region here. He's talking